Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine Podcast Radio. You're about to listen to an episode of Your Everyday Cyber Podcast with Limor, Kessem, and Diana Kelly. We live in a cyberspace almost all the time, but do we know enough about living in it securely? Join this dynamic duo as they take you through an exploration of daily cyber activities and how you can make better choices to make them secure for yourself and your family. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Welcome to Your Everyday Cyber. I'm Limor, Kessem, a cybersecurity professional and advisor. My co-host is Diana Kelly, a cybersecurity expert who is the CTO and co-founder of Security Curve. So we're kicking off another year. It's Your Everyday Cyber podcast celebrates a birthday. So happy birthday to us. And happy 2022, everyone. Yeah. We hope you had a great holiday season. We hope you shopped for better secured gadgets and appliances. And that one of your resolutions, at the very least, was a security one and like using a password manager. And today we have yet another one for you, and that is all about backups.
Yeah, and backups, I think, are one of these things that a lot of times people kind of know. It's like flossing our teeth. We hear it, we know we're supposed to do it, but it may be difficult to understand what that actually means, how to accomplish this. And this one feels very near and dear to my heart too, because a local business that we go to here where we live was actually attacked. And one of the reasons they had to pay the ransom was that they didn't have any backups. And I was sad when they told me, because I said, "Oh, we could have helped you, to set up your backups." And they said, "Well, we just kind of wish that we'd known." So this is our episode. We're very excited to have an expert, Mike McBride, with us to take us through backups, what they are, why we need them, and how you can get your backup game on point. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. So Mike is a techie, he's a blogger, and he's an e-discovery analyst. And like Diana said, he's going to help us unpack the backups subject and why they're so important. So Mike, what is e-discovery, by the way?
So e-discovery is actually short for electronic discovery, which realistically in 2022 now is all legal discovery, right? Everything's electronic. But the basic idea behind e-discovery and behind what I do as a consultant is to help people kind of, hey, we're involved in a lawsuit, we're involved in an investigation, there's something going on, and we need to figure out where our data is and what data is important, because the first thing the lawyer is going to ask you is, what email do you have that talks about this? What documents do you have that talks about this? So that's kind of where I live on a daily basis, is identifying where data lives, where it should live, where it doesn't live, all those sorts of questions. And backups become a really important part of that, right? Because stuff happens, stuff gets lost, right? And if you have backups, then we can get it again.
So, Mike, when we're talking about backups, do we mean that we have to take a backup of everything that's on my system at this moment? And how do backups work? Do I just have to back up my entire hard drive every time?
You can, right? That's one option. The way that we approach it, though, from a professional point of view, really is, let's take some time, right? Not when you've been hit with ransomware, not when you've been hit with a lawsuit, right? But way before any of that stuff happens, just kind of sit down and say, okay, what data do I have as an individual, as a household, as a small business, as a large business, that I absolutely need, right? That if something happened one day, this is information that I absolutely have to have, right? And once you kind of identify what that data is, right, then we start talking about, okay, what are the risks? How do we make sure you have a copy of this data no matter what happens, right? That there's a copy of this data somewhere that you can access and you can get to. So for everybody, that's going to look a little different, right? For an individual, that might be, some tax information, some banking information, your vaccination cards now probably are in that data, and that got to have that sort of data set now. For some folks, it's photos, right? I take a lot of photos when I used to travel for a living. Those are important to me. I don't want to lose those, right? They're important memories. People take family photos, so there's a lot of different things that could be in a business, right? You could be talking about customer information. You could be talking about employee information, right? And payroll and things like that, right? When you don't have access to that data, it causes a real problem in running your business. So really it's all about, the question of what should you back up? Sure, you can back up everything, right? It's just going to take more time and more money. But really being able to sit down and identify what's the stuff that tomorrow I absolutely have to have if something happens.
That makes total sense, and thank you for that. I'm thinking here about different types of devices. A lot of people, especially in the US, have a Mac versus a Windows-based machine. And we know that Macs can connect to iCloud, and then Windows would connect to OneDrive, and Google users like Google Drive. Do you think that as a home user, that's good enough for me? That's enough backup for me? Or does that only back up certain things? What should I be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it's better than nothing, right? Absolutely. It's like 100% better than doing nothing, right? And it does, right? One of the things that having something like iCloud, Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, like all these services do, one is they make it super easy, right? Everything syncs up, right? I edit something on my computer, it syncs up to the cloud, right? It syncs up to that service and uploads that to that device, right? The only time that I really start to worry about that, and since you were talking about ransomware, Diana, this is a good example, right? Is if your computer gets hit with ransomware and all the files on your computer get encrypted and they then sync up to your Google Drive or your iCloud, suddenly both copies are encrypted, right? Right. So that becomes a little bit of a concern for me, right? Okay, how do I account for that? Because again, and this is something that I will probably repeat many times with backups, right? Stuff happens, right? Things break. People get ransomware, right? This doesn't, these things happen, and it's not, I'd like to say it's nobody's fault, but in ransomware it is. Somebody's actually doing that, right? But things happen, and so you want to be wary of that. And so when I think about Google Cloud or Google and iCloud and things like that, those are great services. I use them. I sync up my photos and other things that way. But they're not the only copy that I keep. That's not the only backup copy I keep, because I know if I get hit with ransomware, both copies are getting screwed up for me.
Yeah, that's a great point. And what about we've talked about home users and things like photos and stuff. What if I'm a small business and my business needs this data to run, as you were talking about, finding what's important, or maybe it's regulated. It could have financial information or health information, depending on the kind of business I'm in. Is there something as a small business owner I should think about if I was going to, in addition to having a copy that isn't connected, so that you don't get the duplication of ransom to ransom encryption? But what else should the SMBs be thinking about for their backups, and would iCloud or OneDrive or Google Drive?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, the thing I love about having a cloud backup is that it's offsite, right? If something happens to my house, something happens to my business, there's a copy of the data out on the internet someplace that I can get. So no worries. Great. Right. So you want to kind of think about it that way. I know we've talked a little bit about, not on the show, but previously, about the 3-2-1 rule, right? Where you have 3 copies of your data. One's the live copy that you work with. The other 2 are backups. And one of those backups is not on site, right? It's off site. So cloud is a great way to solve that, right? To give me an offsite copy, right? And then I still want to keep that second copy, right? And be able to have maybe an external hard drive, or again, depending on your service, right? Depending on what you're doing as a business, right? I know that a lot of small businesses are using things like Office 365, right? Where everything sort of lives in the cloud all the time, right? And so that kind of changes your dynamic a little bit, because there isn't really anything local for you to worry about, right? Everything is out on the internet. And again, that's very helpful. It helps to have that stuff in another location, because again, things happen. I live in South Louisiana. we get hurricanes, right? And sometimes hurricanes just take the whole building, right?
No kidding.
Right. And so if I've got, as much as I'm an advocate for saying, look, have an external hard, like for at home, for example, I have an external hard drive, right? That I plug in, I back everything up, and then I unplug it, right? So if I get hit with ransomware, it's not connected to anything. Great. But if something happens to my house, the external drive and the laptop both are gone, right? So again, that's where having that third copy out in the cloud says, okay, great, I can just hook up another computer somewhere and go get that data again.
So that kind of made me think about, the destructibility of things physically and maybe not only physically, because, we hear a lot about ransomware and businesses have been plagued with this thing for, for the past few years. It's been crazy. And, so ransomware is the kind of bad malware, bad applications that can go ahead and encrypt your data, make it illegible, unhuman readable anymore. And I'm just wondering, if I have backups, is it better that my backups are encrypted in advance? Isn't it safer? Is it not safer? Like, what do you think about that for businesses and even for just everyday people?
To be honest with you, I think there are certain types of data that should just always be encrypted. Right. So if you're a small business, your personal information about your employees should always be encrypted. Right. You should not have that sitting around on an external drive unencrypted. Because again, stuff happens. That just so credit card information for your customers, your personal information of your employees, right? And again, thinking about that from a personal standpoint, as just an individual or a family, right? Any documents that have that sort of information in it, just keep them encrypted, right? There's no reason not to encrypt those. Right? Because we want to keep that data as safe as we possibly can, and just having it sit anywhere, whether it's on your laptop, on an external drive, because again, stuff happens, right? Laptops get stolen, right? Right? I want that information encrypted. I want to make sure I'm keeping that information safe, right? And then it's really a question of how much time do you want to and effort do you want to put into encrypting your family photos or your vacation photos or other things that again are important to you. You want them backed up, but there's not so much of a danger of somebody finding them and getting a hold of them. So I think we try to kind of differentiate between those two types of data and say, look, certain things you just need to encrypt, right? That's just a rule. Right. In the financial industry and in regulated industry, that's a rule, right? There are certain things you have to encrypt.
Precisely.
So, we know that that's true. And then there's other things you just want to consider, right? How important is it? How much time and effort do you want to really put into this? Personally, like I said, I encrypt all the stuff that's got financial information, personal information, my social security number. But I don't really worry about encrypting my travel photos, right? Nobody's going to steal those and make a ton of money off of them. They're not that good.
Okay. What about ransomware attackers? Are they trying to get people's stuff like, precious photos, family stuff, and kind of extort them with that?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard it. I'm sure you guys have as well, right? That, ransomware has started to move beyond just we're going to encrypt your data and give it back to you when you pay the ransom into, correct. Hey, we're going to steal it.
Mm-hmm. They're going to steal it and extort you.
And then we're going to have a whole other conversation after we look at some of this data. So certainly, if you're doing something that is extortable, you probably want to encrypt that.
Yeah, anything important or sensitive, I get it.
Yeah, even precious. Yeah, like I know a lot of people have scanned photos that they had of family members, from 100 years ago. Photos that 100-year-old photos and stuff, and that may be now their only version, so that it becomes priceless to them, which is horrible that ransomware's the attacker. Yeah, but the criminals are going to crime. So
they are, and they're going to be at least somewhat smart about it, right? If they have the ability to look at that data, again, your family photos from 100 years may not be something they can really use against you, but suddenly the asking price goes up. Like, oh, you've got this really precious, important, sentimental value to this. So, our ransom just went up a little bit.
Yeah, it's terrible. So, there's sort of, it seems like when I watch the TV that there's almost no end of ads about, we'll do third-party backup for you, and don't worry about your backup, just sign up with us for X number of months, and that's it, we'll take care of everything. Are these services useful? Does it make sense to pay the extra money for them, and what are they actually delivering for the customer?
That is the $64,000 question, right? What are they actually delivering? I think before you spend money on any of those kinds of services, I personally, I want to answer that question. What are you actually offering me, right? When you do this, right? What are you just making another copy of my data on the same hard drive? Are you just putting it in the cloud? Are you not encrypting it when you put it in the cloud, right? I want answers to all of those questions before I give anybody money. Maybe I'm just cheap that way, but I just need to know, right? I don't want to start spending money on something and then find out that, I had this backup service that really wasn't working, it is only backing up once a month, and now I've lost a month worth of data. Like I want answers to those questions before I start handing it. And if they can't answer those questions, just walk away.
That is perfect entree to my next and actual last question. So, you were saying I lost a month worth of data. So how often should I be backing up my data? If I'm just a person who's at home, I use a computer for just everyday things, or if I'm obviously if I'm a small business, that answer is going to change. So how often should it be? And what would be a way to kind of set me on a path to backups that is going to be ordained? In other words, I'll remember to back up things on time and so on. What would you tell me to do as advice that our audience can take away from this podcast today?
First of all, back up. Absolutely, right? If you're not backing up, go buy an external hard drive, plug it into your computer, put a copy of your files on it, unplug it. Like do the minimum, right? At least do something like that. How often you do it? Again, for an individual, a person, a household where that data is not, your important data isn't changing all that often. I don't know. When I think about things like email and things like that, I start thinking, you probably want to do that at least once a month as a household. Again, as an individual, I want to make sure I have important emails that come in. I want to make sure I have any important files, any changes I'm making to important files, any new photos I'm bringing in. Right. So I'm going to do that probably at least once a month. You may not need to do it once a month, right? If you're not doing a lot of that stuff, you may need to do it more, right? If you're doing a lot of business through an email account that, a Gmail or Outlook account where you probably want to have a copy of that data just in case, right? Especially because the internet goes out sometimes, right? So I want to have that. All right. I might do it more, right? The important thing is getting it on a schedule and keeping to it, right? Making it a habit. For me, what that means is that, it's part of my month end, right? At work, we've got a bunch of things we do at month end, right? Before the month closes out, we've got to, get all our time entered, got to do all this other stuff. And I just have this little calendar item that pops up, in the evening at the end of the month, said, hey, don't forget to back up. Right, just go in and plug that drive in, start a copy job, go to bed, let it run overnight, and then come back in the morning, unplug it, and move on with my life. So the important thing really is developing that habit, keeping it top of mind, understanding it. Right, for small businesses, you may be looking at something that's much more frequent, right, because your data is changing every day, and that's data you need. Right. So you might want to even look at something that is a service or a device that does the automatic backups, that is syncing the stuff every day. And then, when I worked in a large law firm, we had a off-site sync that's ran every 5 minutes.
Yeah,
right. Wow. Just synced everything up live, right, immediately. So that if anything ever happened, there was this entire copy of our entire network in another location that we could just log into. So again, we really want to think about how often that data is changing and how painful is it going to be, right? If I haven't backed up in a week, how much pain is that going to be to recreate all the stuff we did this week?
Absolutely. Well, that makes tons of sense. Mike, thank you so much. A great chat about backups that's suitable for both everyday people listening to our podcast and small businesses. And thank you, our listeners, for being with us today and on every episode. We hope that this one as well is going to serve you well. And if you have other ideas about tech that you want to know more about, please send us a message and we're going to get an expert to help us address your questions. On our next episode, Gadgets to help with your New Year's resolutions, we're going to help you stick with the things you want to achieve in this new year. So we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at youreverydaycyber@securitycurve.com. If you're on Twitter, you can follow us at cyber_everyday. And you're going to be able to also find information about our guest, Mike McBride, today on Twitter and on our podcast page. So thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to the next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Your Everyday Cyber Podcast with Limor and Diana. If you learned something new and this conversation made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.